I welcome you to sequel number 54. And this sequel is just a continuation of yesterday's sequel. You remember we left when these people accompanying Apolokagwa to Mombasa were busy looking for transport to go to Zanzibar, and the storekeeper of the Church Missionary Society was helping them out. And then, of course, I promised you that we shall see how the two parties separated. So let's begin with this party of visitors. Very far away in the Seychelles Island, the administrator on the island was called Ernest Beacom. Ernest Beacom Sweet Escort. Now, Britain had told him to expect 3 visitors who were to bring him some documentations, and they were to be allowed to visit one of the prisoners on the Le Rocher camp, which was found on the Mahé Island, the biggest island. We've talked about this in earlier sequels, so we know exactly where Mwanga was. So the administrator in the Seychelles was expecting these 3, and yet the records in Uganda had reported that these 3 were to accompany Apolokagwa up to Mombasa, see him off, and return to Buganda. That is the story in Buganda. However, what is happening? Britain is informing Seychelles to expect 3 visitors with some documentation, and they are to be given access to the prisoner on the Le Rocher camp. Who are the 3? I repeat. The Kago, Yakobo Musajja Alumbwa, the Chimbugwe, Andrea Chiwanuka, and the priest, Reverend Bartolomayo Zimbe. Now, these 3, of course, were able to get the tickets at Mombasa. They then sailed to Zanzibar. It's only after you get to Zanzibar that you could get transport to the Seychelles Islands. As a matter of fact, the only transport available was by the Indian British ships. The Indian British ships are the ones which carried people, and we are not carrying people to Seychelles as such, but it was just a transit point as they headed to India and other places in the Indian Ocean. And so, without so much ado, from Zanzibar, they are able to get the ship, they are able to board the ship, the 3 of them, and of course their guides, and they arrive safely in the Seychelles Island. Here, they visited the camp, the Le Rocher camp on the Mahé Island, after, of course, being received by the governor's representatives. And they were able to go to Mwanga's camp. In the La Rocher was also the camp of Kabalega. They never went there. Was also the camp of the Ghanaian king, Ashanti Naha Pampe. They also never went there, but all these lived in separate households of the prisoners' camp. So for them, they went for Mwanga. They discovered that everybody in the camp was free, although those free people could go around, Mwanga could not. Their dependents were not prisoners, therefore. Unfortunately, Mwanga was a prisoner. He could not move out like the others did. And of course, they noticed that there was police guard, 24-hour police surveillance of the area. The colonial government in Great Britain was very much aware of these visitors. They had already alerted the Seychelles Island, and therefore the visitors were allowed access to visit Mwanga. Now, when the 3 visitors reached Mwanga, according to the documents at the National Archives, Mwanga was surprised. He was not expecting them. They could not also confess that they were secret visitors. But what did they want? As a matter of fact, the documents say that the actual camp where Mwanga was within the camp, the La Rocher camp on Mahé Island, was called Pointe Canaan House, which diagram I've already showed you in the audio video of these sequels. That is exactly where they found him. And now the reason why Bartolomeo Zimbe is part of this delegation is understood. He went there, being a very good friend of Mwanga, to convince him to accept to be baptized. Now the question is, why do you want to baptize Mwanga? The man refused baptism all along. He was on the throne, I don't know how many times. He decided to run away after he was requested to abdicate the throne. He is very well known to be more sympathetic and more leaning towards Roman Catholics. Now here you are, you an Anglican priest, you've come to baptize Mwanga II. Now, as a researcher, I don't believe that this cover-up story is true, although that is what the National Archive documents are saying, that he requested, they convinced Mwanga to accept to be baptized, and the only thing Mwanga said was that he did not want to be baptized by Bartolomeo Zimbe. He wanted to be baptized by a priest from the Seychelles Island, most likely a Muzungu or a Seychelles native. And so what do? They leave. It looks like the other two did not have an agenda. The records do not talk about what Yakobo Musajja Arumba wanted to do with Mwanga. They don't talk about what Andrea Chiwanuka wanted to do with Mwanga. But they talk about Bartolomeo Zimbe, the one engaging Mwanga for this baptism story. And so they leave the camp and they report back to the Seychelles authorities. They tell them Mwanga's request. After they've told them the agenda, as a matter of fact, the letter had said it all. The letter that Yakobo Musajja Arumba and Andrea Chiwanuka gave over to the administrator of Seychelles, Ernest Buckingham Street, ESCOM, had told them everything of what the British wanted, which we don't know. The archives do not have the details of that letter. The letter and what it was saying is not in the archive, but they handed over a document. Why that document could not be sent by postage is the million-dollar question. Why couldn't they send a telegram or a telex, which Uganda had access to at that time? We saw the Nandis cutting the cables in Western Kenya. So the telegram was there, the telex was there. Why must physical people go and visit Seychelles? Of course, for baptism, it's understandable. But for this document to pass over, it means these were secrets that could not be laid in the public domain. And one could say that it was the major work of Yakobo Musajja Arumba and Andrea Chiwanuka to hand over the document. And then the next item was go and baptize Mwanga. So the authorities in Seychelles managed to get a priest, and this priest is recorded. Is the Reverend Harold Johnson. I repeat the name, recorded in the National Archives. The Reverend Harold Johnson is the man, is the priest they got. The question is, was Reverend Harold Johnson an Anglican priest, a Lutheran priest, a Baptist priest, a Methodist priest, a Roman Catholic priest? Of course, this was a former French island. No wonder all the names are still in French. La Roche, most likely this was a Reverend Father. I have no idea. But they simply said they found a reverend, they were given a reverend. His name was Reverend Harold Johnson. One could only guess that he was an Anglican, judging by the name. And so, Reverend Harold Johnson, together with all the visitors, return. I don't know when this was, it's not recorded. The actual date of their return journey is not recorded. And they took the priest to the Point Canaan house within the La Roche camp on Mahé Island. And they baptize Mwanga II with the name Daniel. Again, there are no details. How did they arrive at the name Daniel? Did Mwanga ever request for it? Did Bartolomeo think of it? Did Mwanga ask Bartolomeo, what name do you want? All that is not recorded. These skimpy details, which I was gathering as I looked through the document, some are even handwritten. And I needed experts to even read some of the handwriting for me because I'm not very good at reading Bazungu's handwritings. And Mwanga gets baptized. All we know that this is in May 1902, but we do not have an actual date of baptism, although we have their date of arrival on the Mahé island of the Seychelles. And so the visitors leave. And so the visitors leave the Seychelles. They return to Zanzibar, they return to Mombasa, they visit Freetown, and they return to Buganda. The journey to Zanzibar finished. They have left Mwanga very well and alive. They only baptized him, but they gave documents to the authorities from their fellow authorities of Uganda. Now, what about the other side? On the other side, this was on the 17th of May. Mwanga and his other delegates, Ham Mukasa, Reverend Ernest Miller, Protected Government Officer Prendergast, they board a ship. And it was a very huge ship. They say that it was a 7-story ship. It was called the Nevasa Glasgow. Nevasa Glasgow. That was the name of the ship. And it was taking them to Port Eden in the waters of the Gulf of Eden that leads to the mouth of the Red Sea. And it was to stop at that point. So they docked in Port Eden, and the date is recorded because Ham Mukasa wrote a book. They docked there on the 24th of May, 1902, and they disembarked from the ship to a hotel which was called the Europe, where they spent 3 days waiting for another ship to take them to Europe. On the 27th of May, they boarded another ship which was twice the size of the Nevasa Glasgow, which had brought them from Mombasa. And this took them into the Red Sea, and they arrived at Port Said in the Suez Canal on the 2nd of June 1902. But Apollo Kagwa was seriously unwell. Yeah, and he was in the care of the ship doctors, according to Ham Mukasa in his book. So on the 7th of June, they arrived at Port Naples. I think this is Italy. They then disembarked and boarded a smaller vessel, which took them around Naples. Yeah, maybe they had a guide. Then on the 9th of June, they arrived at Port Marseille. This is in France now. And they boarded a train, which train took them across France. On the 10th of June, they reached Paris, the capital of France. And the sight of large houses, the wide roads, and many horses amazed them, according to Ham Mukasa. Then they boarded another train to Port Calais on the North Sea. At Port Calais, they boarded a steamer to Port Dover. Now, Port Dover is in Great Britain. From where they boarded a train to London's Victoria Station, where they arrived at 7 o'clock on the 10th of June. They were received by Sir Clement Hill and Captain Hobart, and this led them to the Prendergast Palace Hotel. Prendergast Palace Hotel. Now, while in London, Reverend Ernest Miller was the interpreter, yeah, while Hobart was the tour guide, yeah. So their hotel first visitor was Henry Stanley, the man who took the letter by Mutesa to England for advertising. Yes, he was their first visitor, and he remembered both of them. He remembered Apollo Kagwa, and he remembered Ham Mukasa. Why? Because he met the two at Kabula in Ankole. You remember in 1889, as they were preparing to come and fight, to go and fight Kalema, the Muslim king. And at that time, Henry Stanley was with the Emin Pasha with some Nubians, and they were heading to the coast. And so they were able to find them there and encourage them on to fight. So basically, that's how the two groups split. Now we know the group that went to Zanzibar, what they did, and now they are back home. And now we are going to spend a few sequels digging deeper into what the delegation that went to England did there, including all the undercover work, and then relate it to what is happening or to what was happening in the Seychelles Islands. May the good Lord bless us all. Amen.